afternoon, Year 6, and welcome to the English section of the Gainsborough Academy Transition Evening. Now, folks, we've got some terrible news. There's been a murder at the Gainsborough Academy. The police have been called to a crime scene at the Gainsborough Academy where Miss Gledhill, our wonderful director of English, has been murdered. We're scouring the CCTV for clues, but we really could do with your help to investigate. To do this, we're going to have to use our inference skills. Now, inference means taking what we know, adding that to evidence, and then working out what that clue means, making a decision based on what we know. Here's a picture of the crime scene. Now, we're going to have a look through some of the evidence in the hope that you can unpick exactly what's happened to poor Miss Gledhill. Now, first of all, we've got this book. I'd like you to pause the video and work out why is this important? What can you see from it? What can you deduce from it? Can you use your inference skills to work out why this was a part of the murder scene? Next, let's have a look at piece of evidence C. What can you tell me about this footprint? Pause the video and see if you can work out what this clue shows us. Think about who made the footprint. What are they doing there? Why did it happen there? When did it happen there? The next clue that we need to unpick is this locked cupboard. Pause the video, think about who might have locked it, what could be in the cupboard, why is it locked, and when did it get locked? And finally, for some reason, the murderer left some jumbled up letters on the table. Can you pause the video and work out what word these letters might make? Right, guys, let's have a look through those inference skills that you've been using. First of all, we'll think about how was the murder happened. If you decided that Miss Gledhill had been murdered by the book, then you'd be absolutely right. Because it's a school book, this could mean that it's taken place in school. It must have been done by somebody who works in the school because they're the only ones that have access to the school. What might the footprint tell us? Well, it's quite a large footprint, and we usually associate that with it being a male footprint. It also looks like the type of shoe that a suit would usually be worn with. So would they be dressed in smart clothes? If so, why would they need to be dressed in smart clothes? What might the locked door tell us? Something in that cupboard is definitely out of bounds. A crucial clue could be lurking in that cupboard. And finally, what do the letters spell? If you guessed it said traitor, you'd be absolutely right. Now, we've just got some new evidence that's come together. We've managed to get some photographs of the people who've been arrested under the suspicion of committing the murder. First of all, we've got Miss Greaves from the English department. Then we've got Mr. Frith from the science department. He was seen leaving the school round about the time that the murder happened. And we've got Mr. Wood from mathematics. He was in the building when the murder happened. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass you over to the maths department, and hopefully you're going to be able to deduce some more evidence and clues to work out who committed this ghastly crime. Good luck, Year 6.
So there's been a murder at TGA. Mrs. Gledhill has been murdered, and we need to find out who the killer is. Investigators have found a newly locked cupboard close by, it requires a 4-digit combination to get into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some maths to see if we can find out any more clues inside this locked cupboard. So there are 4 questions for us to answer, and the answer for each of those questions is going to give us a digit for our code. So I'm going to read the questions, and then I'd like you to pause the video and see if you can work out the answer to each of the questions and crack the code. So the first question is, what is the only factor that 14 and 25 have in common? So you need to think about what factors are and write them down. The second question is, what is missing in this sequence? So it goes 1, 2, 4, something, 11, 16. So think about how the sequence is changing each time. The third question is, what is the only even prime number? So for this question, you're going to need to understand what a prime number is. So have a think about what a prime number might be. The fourth question is, what is 360 divided by 5, then divided by 4, and then divided by 2? So you might have a couple of divisions that you will need to do there. I would use short division to try and help you with that question. So pause the video and see if you can have a go at any of these questions, and then I'm going to go through the answers so we can see if you've managed to unlock the padlock. So if you manage to get these as your answers, 1, 7, 2, and 9, then well done. If you manage to get some of them, that's great stuff too. The first question was, what is the only factor that 14 and 25 have in common? So factors are numbers that go into other numbers. So if I write out my list of factors for 14, that is 1, 2, 7, and 14. And then my factors for 25, that's 1, 5, and 25. You can see there that the only thing that appears in both of those lists is the number 1. So the answer to question number 1 is 1. The second question was about a sequence. Now, this one looked a bit tricky because you might think that it goes up by doubling every time. So 1 doubled is 2, 2 doubled is 4. So you might have thought the next number was 8. But then 8 doubled doesn't give you 11. So it can't be that rule. If you think about it carefully, what's happening every time is you're adding a different number, and each of the numbers that you're adding have a pattern of their own. So we add 1, then we add 2, then we add 3, then we add 4, and then we add 5. Next number, we would add 6. So here, 1 add 1 will give us 2, add 2 will give us 4, add 3 will give us 7. So the missing number here is 7. The third question was, what is the only even prime number? Now, for this question, you needed to know what a prime number was. So a prime number is a number that has only got 2 factors. That means it can only be divided by the number 1 and the number itself. So 2 is an example of a prime number. That's the answer to this question. So numbers that will divide into 2 are 1 and 2. If we think of some other prime numbers, so things like 3 is a prime number. So the only numbers that will divide into 3 are 1 and 3. An example of something that isn't prime might be, say, 10, because 1 will divide into 10 and 10 will divide into 10, but there are other numbers that will divide into it too. Like, for example, number 2 and the number 5 will both divide into 10. So that means that 10 is not prime. So the only number that is prime and is even is 2. The fourth question is dividing 360 by 5 and then dividing that by 4 and then dividing that by 2. So if we start off with 360 and divide it by 5, we would get 72. If we then divide 72 by 4, we would get 18. If we then divide 18 by 2, we would get 9. So the final digit in our combination is 1729. So we've managed to get into our locked cupboard, and inside this locked cupboard is a diary which is all written in code. So the investigators are really interested in this code because they want to know why somebody would write something in code, and I'm fairly sure that you can think of reasons why somebody might write a diary entry in code, because they don't really want anybody else to read it. So they want to see if it helps them find the killer. So they're going to decrypt, or we're going to decrypt, the most recent entry to see if it can help us. So this is encrypted with something called a pigpen cipher, and it requires you to use the key on the left to work out what each letter is on the right-hand side. So as you can see, the first symbol in our code is like a upside down L, and that relates to the letter I. So if you look at the key on the left and you look at the letter I, you can see that around that letter is that shape that's in the top left-hand corner. It's like an upside down L. If you look at, say, let's have a look at another letter. Let's say the letter E. The letter E would be a square because the box goes all the way around the letter E. If we go to the second symbol in the code on the right-hand side, it is an L, isn't it? It's that L shape. So what does that L shape represent? It doesn't represent the letter L like you might think it does. If you look on the left-hand side where the key is, you'd see that it represents the letter C, because around the letter C there is that L shape. So what you've got to do is you've got to try and work out what each of these symbols represent to try and crack the code. So I suggest pausing the video and see if you can work out what the code is. So if you managed to work out what the code says, well done. There are no spaces in it because the person who wrote this will have wanted to make it as difficult as possible for somebody to try and crack the code. So here, if you have all the letters written out and then you were to write it out as a sentence, it says, "I can't believe I killed her, all because she doesn't teach my subject." So we've got to remember Mrs. Gledhill was the head of English. So what we need to do is we need to maybe look at the suspects again and see if we can use it to rule anybody out. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to pass you over to Mr. Frith, who is going to be doing some work on some more clues to see if you can work out who it was who killed Mrs. Gledhill.
Welcome to the Science Lab. The final part of your investigation involves looking at two more pieces of evidence: some fingerprint prints found at the crime scene and some trace evidence of metal powders that were found near the body with a footprint in. Now, hopefully these last two pieces of evidence will provide you with enough information to finally identify the person that carried out the murder. Now, if we look at the fingerprints first, crime scene investigators use these all the time. So everyone has a unique fingerprint, even twins. And however, it might be the same. Over time, you might get little scars, so it might change slightly, but you keep them for life. Now, we can categorize fingerprints into three categories, and scientists use this information to be able to identify people. Now, the three categories are as follows. You can have arch fingerprints. Now, the arch fingerprints are easily identifiable by the lines of the fingerprint start on one side, on the left-hand side, and they leave on the opposite side, creating an archway. There are loop fingerprints, and these start on one side, go round, and then end on the same side. So they come in and leave on the same side of the fingerprint. Then there's whorls, and whorls are nice and easy to identify because the lines form little circles going round. Now, a fingerprint might place a person at the crime scene, but it doesn't tell you a specific time that they're there. So we've taken the fingerprints of our three suspects, Miss Graves, Mr. Frith, and Mr. Wood. And you can start to look at their fingerprints and identify some features in there. So you might see in Miss Greaves that you've got loops coming up into that, and you've also got some arches in there. Mr. Frith is very identified as being a whorl, whereas Mr. Wood's got some whorls in there, but maybe not as much as Mr. Frith. Now, what you're going to see on the next slide is some fingerprints taken from the crime scene. What we need to do is you will need to pause the video and you will need to see if you can match up any of our suspects with the fingerprints taken at different points in the crime scene. So, the fingerprints. So you've got one that was found on the door into the main school. You've got one found on the inside of the door where the room where the murder took place. One found on the locker where you found the last set of clues. One on the murder weapon, the book. One found on the door handle on the outside of the room. And then one found on the desk next to the body. So pause the video now and try and work out which suspect's fingerprints matches up with which fingerprint from the crime scene. Okay, hopefully everybody had a good chance to try and identify those. Some are quite tricky to match up. So let's look, see if we identify them the same way. So the first one, found on the door into the building, hopefully you identified that as belonging to Mr. Wood. Now, it might not particularly place him at the scene of the crime, but it might give you a clue whether he was in the building or not. The second one, found on the inside of the door in the room where the murder took place, hopefully you identified that as belonging to Mr. Frith. The third one, found on the locker, again belongs to Mr. Frith. The fourth one, found on the murder weapon, another one for Mr. Frith. And then the fifth one, found on the door handle on the outside of the room, belonged to Miss Greaves. And then finally, found on the desk next to the body, well, this fingerprint was unidentified. It didn't match any of our suspects. So who could that belong to? The final part of our investigation now is looking at trace evidence. So the trace evidence we found at our crime scene was this white metal powder, and it was spilled at the crime scene, and you can see that there's a footprint in that white powder. So we took trace evidence samples also from the clothing and the shoes of all three suspects. So how can we identify and match the metal powder found at the crime scene with one of our suspects? How could we match those powders up? I think. So scientists use something called a flame. Now metal powders or metal compounds, when burnt in a flame, will give off different colours. So what we can do is we can burn the powder in a flame in a science lab, record the colour, and then try and match it up with the same colour of the powder found on our suspects. So when we do this test in a second in our science lab, we're going to be looking for these colours. Lithium powder will give a red flame. Sodium powder, sodium metal present, will give an orange or golden flame. Potassium burns with this purple or what we say lilac flame, and copper gives a really good blue-green colour. So when we look at our crime scene powder and we look at our evidence found on our suspects, we will be able to match up and see which powder matches. That will place the suspect at the scene of the crime.
Okay, so the final piece of evidence that we got from the crime scene was a white powder that was found around the body. If you remember, had a footprint in it. Now we've got that white powder sample here, and we've also got 3 powders that were found on our suspect's shoes. We've got the powder from Miss Gray's shoes, we've got the powder from Mr. Frith's shoes, and we've got the powder from Mr. Wood's shoes. Now they all look the same, so we need a different way of finding out if what's different about them and matching the powders found in the suspect's shoes to the one found at the crime scene. And the way we can do that is by using a flame test. Now these are all metal compounds, and different metals when put in a flame will burn with different colours. So all we've got to do is put our sample into play and see what colour it goes, and then match it up by burning the other 3 and see if we get a colour match. So here is the sample found at the crime scene. So look for the colour that this metal compound goes when I put it in the plate. Okay, so we get this really brilliant red colour. Okay, so this is the one found at the crime scene, and we've got really brilliant red colour. If I just do a little bit more, yeah, we've got a red colour. You can see the red coming through. Now, if I do the powder that was found on Miss Gray's shoe, we're going to look to see if it matches up to that red colour. Here's Miss Gray, this is a sample found on her shoe, so if it's red, it places her at the crime scene. Okay, so Miss Gray, we get this greeny colour coming through. I'll just do a little bit more to check that colour. So we've got kind of a greeny blue colour coming through. There we go. A greeny blue colour. So Miss Gray's sample doesn't match. Now if we go to Mr. Frith's sample, this was found on his shoe. Oh, and we can see that red colour again. So a nice red colour coming through. So it does match the sample that was found at the crime scene. The final one, Mr. Wood's shoe, we found this powder. And it's not a red colour. In fact, it's a bright orange colour. So, does that help us now solve this crime? Do you know who committed the murder? Can you put all the evidence together and come up with your final prediction?